You ever look back at a moment in your life and think, yep, that was the exact second everything went to hell? I do. For me, it was the day my dad sat me down at our kitchen table, the same one where I used to eat cereal before school, where we played board games on Friday nights, where I thought I had a home, and told me I needed to pack my things. Not for college. Not for some exciting job or adventure. No, I was being kicked out of my own home. And why? To make room for his new wife's kids. But before I get into that, let me take you back to where it all started. Because this wasn't some sudden, overnight betrayal. No, it was a slow, creeping invasion, the kind you don't notice until it's too late to stop it. I never thought my life was perfect, but it was ours. It was me and my dad against the world after my mom passed away when I was 8. He did his best to raise me, and even though he was rough around the edges, I never doubted that he cared. We had our little routines. Saturday mornings were for pancakes. We always watched baseball together, even though I didn't care about the sport. He worked long hours, but whenever he came home, he'd ruffle my hair and ask me about my day. Looking back, I realize now that those moments meant the world to me. I thought he'd always be in my corner. Then she came along. Her name was Jennifer. And from the moment she walked into our lives, everything changed. At first, I was happy for my dad. He had been alone for so long, and I figured if he had found someone who made him happy, that was a good thing, right? I was even polite when he introduced her to me. She had this overly sweet, fake smile, like she was trying way too hard to get me to like her. But there was something off about her. Even at 13, I could feel it. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Taylor and Mason, who were both younger than me. And almost immediately, I could tell that in her world, they were the main characters. I was just a side character. The changes didn't happen all at once. At first, it was small things. Jennifer would make comments about how I should be helping out more around the house. "You're the oldest, you should be setting an example," she'd say with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Helping out quickly turned into doing everything. Suddenly, I was the one taking out the trash, washing the dishes, mowing the lawn, while Taylor and Mason did absolutely nothing. If I ever spoke up, I was being selfish, or acting out. Then, my bedroom became a shared space. One night over dinner, Jennifer dropped the news casually, like it was nothing. "Mason's been having nightmares, poor thing," she said with a dramatic sigh. "He just feels safer when he's not alone. And since you're so mature, I know you won't mind bunking together for a little while." I did mind. But my dad, the man who used to have my back, just nodded along like it was nothing. "It's just temporary, bud," he told me. It was never temporary. Mason moved in, and suddenly, I had no space of my own. My posters? Taken down. My books? Stuffed into a tiny shelf while Mason's toys took over. He whined that I shouldn't play my music too loud, that I should let him pick what we watched on TV. And every time I tried to push back, Jennifer swooped in. "You need to be more understanding," she'd scold me. "He's just a kid." As if I wasn't a kid too. For 3 years I tried to adjust. I tried to be the bigger person, to tell myself that things would get better. They didn't. One night, when I was 16, I came home from school to find Jennifer rearranging the furniture in the living room. Except, she wasn't just moving things around, she was clearing space. There were boxes stacked by the door, some labeled with my name. I felt a pit in my stomach. What's going on?" I asked. Jennifer turned, all fake sympathy. "Oh, honey, we've been meaning to talk to you about this." "We?" That's when my dad came into the room, looking anywhere but at me. I knew right then. We sat at the kitchen table, the one where we used to eat breakfast together when I was a kid, and my dad gave me the worst speech of my life. "We just don't have enough space anymore," he said. "Jennifer's kids, they need room to grow. And well, you're almost an adult. I know you'll be fine on your own." My heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" Jennifer cut in, like it wasn't even a big deal. "We've found a great place for you. A room for rent with one of your dad's old buddies. It's really affordable, and it's time you start learning to be independent." A cold wave of disbelief washed over me. Independent? I was 16. I had no job, no savings. I had nothing. And my dad just sat there, nodding like a damn puppet. I don't even remember what I said next. I just remember grabbing my backpack, stuffing it with whatever I could fit, and walking out the door while Jennifer called after me. "Don't be dramatic, dear!" Not even a single "I'm sorry" from my dad. Just like that, I was gone. I spent the next few nights crashing at a friend's house before I finally went to that room for rent my dad had so generously arranged for me. That was the moment I realized I was truly on my own. When the reality of what had just happened to me started to hit. It wasn't just some one-time bad event. It was the start of a whole new life I never asked for. At 16, I was expected to pick myself up and just deal with it. No support. No guidance. My dad and Jennifer didn't offer any real solutions. They didn't care to. Instead of helping me cope with this sudden upheaval, they acted like they were doing me a favor. They found some old basement apartment for me to move into, but it was just their way of pretending they hadn't thrown me out. In their eyes, this was a necessary step in my journey to adulthood. But let me tell you, it was nothing like that. It was a cold, unforgiving world with no one there to catch me when I fell. I spent the first few nights sleeping on a friend's couch. His parents were kind, but they had their own struggles, and I could tell by the second night that I was a burden. They never said it outright, but it was in the way they hesitated before answering the door, the way they whispered in the kitchen when they thought I wasn't listening. I couldn't blame them. They had enough to deal with. With nowhere else to turn, I went to set up the place my dad had arranged for me. It was a damp, unfinished basement in some old guy's house. Rick, the owner, was a long-time drinking buddy of my dad's. He was willing to rent it out for $200 a month, which seemed cheap, but the reality was it was just a cramped, cold space with barely any amenities. Still, it was a roof over my head, even if it didn't feel like home. I didn't have $200. I didn't even have $2. Rick was willing to be flexible if I did work around the house. Fixing things. Mowing his lawn. Running errands. Basically, being his unpaid handyman in exchange for a moldy mattress on the floor. I could still hear my dad's voice in my head. "See? It's not so bad. It'll build character." Character? Yeah, nothing builds character like having to shower at school because your room doesn't have running water. While I was struggling to survive, Jennifer and her kids were living it up. My old room? It had been fully redecorated within a week. No trace of me left. Taylor got my bed. Mason got my desk. My posters, my books, gone. It was like I had never lived there. I tried calling my dad. Once. Twice. 3 times. No answer. When I finally got through, it was clear he didn't want to talk. "Hey, bud. Everything okay?" he asked, his tone stiff. I wanted to scream. "No, everything is not okay. I'm 16 and basically homeless." But I knew it wouldn't change anything. "Yeah," I muttered instead. "Just wanted to check in." A pause. Then a sigh. "I know this is an adjustment, but you're strong. You'll figure it out." That was the last time I called. I got my first job washing dishes at a local diner. Paid under the table. Long hours, bad pay, but it was something. I was exhausted all the time. School? Forget it. I could barely keep up. Teachers noticed but didn't ask questions. Friends drifted away because I was always too busy to hang out. The hardest part wasn't even the work, it was the isolation. No family. No safety net. Just me, scraping by while Jennifer's kids lived in my house, ate my food, slept in my bed. And my dad? He slept soundly next to his new wife, pretending like I didn't exist. That was when I made a promise to myself. I would make it. Not because of him, but in spite of him. And one day, he'd regret every choice he made. That first week living in the basement felt like stepping into another world. The place was cold, dark, and smelled like mildew. It was as if the house itself resented my presence. I spent hours staring at the cracked walls, feeling every bit of the weight pressing down on me. Rick couldn't have cared less. He was often drunk when he came home, muttering some half-hearted words of greeting before locking himself in his room. I didn't mind that much, at least he left me alone. But the loneliness gnawed at me, a constant companion that wouldn't let me forget what I had lost. I wasn't just living in a basement, I was trapped in my own mind. I managed to keep the lights on, but that was it. I was surviving, but not really living. Every day, I faced the grind of my diner job, washing dishes under the relentless heat of the kitchen lights. The work wasn't difficult, but the constant buzz of the fluorescent lights above my head and the clinking of plates never stopped. It was a monotony that took more out of me than I ever thought it could. The people I worked with? They didn't know the first thing about me. To them, I was just a guy who scrubbed pots and swept the floor. And honestly, I didn't care what they thought. But that didn't stop me from feeling the weight of every hour I spent there. I was stuck in a routine that had no end in sight. I'd start my shifts at 4 p.m. and finish long after midnight. The pay was terrible, barely enough to cover my rent, let alone any luxuries like food or clothes. I didn't even know how I managed to get through the days. I guess I just learned to push through the exhaustion. After spent few more weeks in that basement feeling like I was sinking. But one night, while I was scrubbing another pile of dishes, something inside me shifted. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a spark of defiance. I wasn't going to let this be my life. I wasn't going to be another sad story about a kid who got thrown away and never made it. I started doing the things I had to do to get by, but I did them with a new purpose. I began saving what little money I could from the diner job. I cut out everything unnecessary, eating at the diner for every meal, not buying anything that wasn't essential. And somehow, I managed to send some money back to Rick to keep the rent from piling up. Every week was a fight, but I was learning how to navigate it. When I wasn't working or fighting for survival, I started thinking about what I could do next. I knew I needed more than just a job and a diner. I couldn't spend my whole life stuck in this cycle. Slowly, the idea of going back to school started to seem less impossible. Maybe I couldn't attend every day, but I could at least try to get back on track. Maybe I could find something better. Maybe there was still a chance for me to build something. I wasn't there yet, but I was getting closer. The anger I felt at my dad, at Jennifer, at the world, wasn't consuming me anymore. Instead, it was becoming fuel. Fuel for the kind of future I'd never imagined possible when I first moved into that basement. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning. And every day, I was getting closer to proving I could do it on my own. In the midst of all this, I started to feel something else creeping in: resignation. It was like my body and mind were getting used to this new life, even though I still hated it. But no matter how much I tried to settle into my reality, I couldn't shake the thought that something, anything, could change. Then, one evening, just as I was getting used to the exhaustion of my routine, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. "Hey, this is Jennifer. We need to talk." I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to process it. Jennifer? She never contacted me. She hadn't even given me a second thought since the day I was kicked out of the house. I wasn't sure whether to ignore the message or respond with the bitterness I had felt for months. But something inside me wanted to know why. Why now? I sent a quick, simple reply. "What do you want?" Her response came minutes later. "We're in trouble. We need your help. Can we talk?" I sat there for a minute, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to text her back and tell her to get lost. But I didn't. I wanted to know what kind of trouble they were in, what kind of mess Jennifer had gotten herself into. Maybe she was finally paying for the life she built on my back. "Fine," I texted back. "When?" Her reply was quick, almost urgent. "We'll come by tomorrow. Please be home." The next day, I paced around my basement, wondering what this was all about. I had no idea what Jennifer and her kids could possibly want from me. It felt wrong. Part of me wanted to slam the door in their faces, but another part of me, a part I'd tried to ignore for so long, wanted to hear them out. By the time they showed up, I was a wreck. I didn't want to show it, but my nerves were all over the place. It was still hard for me to process what had happened, how quickly everything had fallen apart. But now they were here, standing on the porch like they hadn't just kicked me out of my own life. Jennifer looked different. Tired even. It wasn't the look of a woman who had just gotten everything she wanted. The makeup she'd always worn was gone, and there were lines on her face I'd never noticed before. She wasn't the same woman who had stood in my house, so confident and in control. Taylor and Mason were with her, but they were silent. Too silent. The usual arrogance they carried seemed to have been replaced by something else. Guilt, maybe? No. That couldn't be right. Jennifer knocked, her face set in that same practiced, sugary smile I had come to know all too well. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent. Jennifer stepped inside, motioning for Taylor and Mason to follow. We're in trouble," she said, her voice much quieter than usual. "We don't know who else to turn to. We need a place to stay." I stared at her for a long time, trying to process the situation. They were asking for help. Taylor, the one who had taken my room, was now looking down at the floor, avoiding my gaze. Mason, who'd always treated me like a nuisance, stood with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking uncomfortably at the ground. I couldn't help it. My mind raced back to the day they shoved me out of the house. The day I was tossed aside like an afterthought. And now they wanted something from me. I couldn't believe it. "You need a place to stay?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. "What happened?" "You have a whole house." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. "It's complicated," she said, biting her lip. "We lost everything. The house, the car, Mason and Taylor's school expenses. It all came crashing down. We were too proud to admit it, but now we don't have anywhere to go." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt vindicated. But instead I just felt exhausted. The whole thing felt unreal. How was it possible that Jennifer, the woman who had ruined my life, was now standing in front of me, pleading for help? I wanted to turn them away. I wanted to say, "Figure it out yourself," and slam the door. I had every right to. But something in me, something I hated to admit, hesitated. The anger I'd been holding onto for so long hadn't quite been enough to erase everything. I still remembered the times I had looked up to my dad, how he'd smiled at me before everything changed. But I couldn't ignore the reality either. The truth was, they had left me to sink, and I had to dig myself out alone. Now they were asking me for a lifeline, and it didn't sit right with me. "Well, I don't know what you expect me to do," I said, trying to keep my tone level. "I'm barely getting by myself." Jennifer gave me a desperate look. "We know. But we don't have any other options. Please, just let us stay for a little while. Just until we can get back on our feet." I paused. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel. I thought I would be angry, but all I felt was tired. So tired. "I'll think about it," I said, turning away. "But don't expect it to be easy." It had been a few days since Jennifer and her kids showed up at my door, asking for help. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night, I lay in my crappy little basement apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. I had every reason to slam the door in their faces and tell them to figure it out. They left me. They took everything from me and expected me to just get over it. But the reality was, I couldn't completely turn my back on them. I hated that about myself. So I let them stay. I wasn't sure why. Maybe part of me still believed I owed them something, some kind of compassion. But deep down, I knew I wasn't helping them out of the goodness of my heart. I was doing it because I was hoping that if I showed them mercy, they'd realize just how much they'd screwed up. Maybe, just maybe, they'd understand how much they hurt me. The first night they stayed, I couldn't sleep. I heard Jennifer's voice through the thin walls, talking to Mason and Taylor about how much they'd been struggling. They were all in one room, a far cry from the way they used to live. But I didn't care. It didn't matter how uncomfortable they were now. The next morning, I sat down at the tiny table in the corner of the basement, my stomach a mess of nerves. I didn't want to go back to the days when I was their son, the one they could control and use for their benefit. But the anger inside me was slowly building, gnawing at my insides. They were still there when I came upstairs, making breakfast in my tiny kitchen. Jennifer was at the stove, looking almost too domestic. like she belonged there. But she didn't. This wasn't her home. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." Jennifer turned around with a warm smile, but I wasn't buying it anymore. She could plaster on all the fake smiles she wanted, but it didn't change what had happened. "I know you're upset," she started, "and I want to thank you for letting us stay. But we really appreciate." "Stop." I cut her off. "I don't want your gratitude. I want you to listen. You and Dad kicked me out. What do you think that makes me feel?" She froze, her smile faltering for the first time. Taylor and Mason shifted uncomfortably on the couch, their eyes avoiding mine. I felt my chest tighten as I kept going, my voice growing louder. "You want me to help you, but where were you when I needed help? When I was shoved into that goddamn basement, with nothing but the clothes on my back and no support? You didn't care then. So don't pretend like you care now." Jennifer's face hardened, and for a second, I thought she might say something. But she didn't. She just stood there, looking at me with that same frustrated, defensive look I remembered from all those years ago. She didn't want to admit she'd messed up. She didn't want to face the fact that she had ruined my life. Mason stood up then, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "You don't get it, do you?" he snapped. "We didn't want any of this. We didn't ask for Mom to lose her job, or for everything to fall apart." I stared at him, shocked. He was actually standing up for Jennifer? I hadn't expected that. "No, Mason," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You didn't ask for it. But neither did I. I didn't ask to be thrown out of my own home either." The room went silent. I could feel the tension thick in the air, each of us processing the weight of what had just been said. Jennifer finally spoke up, her voice softer now. "We're sorry, okay? We didn't know what else to do. We thought it was the right thing at the time, but we were wrong." I laughed bitterly, a hollow sound. "Sorry? You think that makes it all better? That a sorry is going to undo everything you did to me?" My voice cracked, and for a second, I thought I was going to break down right there. But I held it in. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. "We didn't want to lose you," she added, almost pleading. "We were just trying to make things work, and we thought." "No. You didn't want to lose me. You wanted a perfect family, and I didn't fit into that. I was in the way. I was a reminder of the past you were trying to erase." The words felt like they were ripping out of me. I was expendable. Jennifer didn't respond to that. She couldn't. She just stood there, her eyes brimming with tears, but she refused to let them fall. And then my dad showed up. The man who had sat back and let it all happen. The man who hadn't stood up for me, not even once. He'd been silent through all of this, and now, as I turned to him, I saw something in his eyes, guilt. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling. "How could you let this happen? How could you let her do this to me?" He finally spoke, his voice low. "I made a mistake, son. I don't know what I was thinking. I just wanted a fresh start for all of us. But I see now what it cost you. And I'm sorry." Sorry. There it was again. The same empty word that didn't mean anything anymore. "I'm done with sorry," I muttered. "I'm done with all of this. You had your chance to make things right. And you blew it." I stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. It wasn't like in the movies where the villain gets defeated in a dramatic showdown. This was real life. And in real life, things didn't always feel like justice, even when it was right in front of you. "You need to leave," I said, my voice calm but firm. The words didn't come easy, but they were the right ones. Jennifer's eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought she might argue. But she didn't. Her shoulders slumped, and I could tell she was beaten down, whether she wanted to admit it or not. "You heard me," I repeated. "Get your stuff together and go. You're not staying here anymore." Mason and Taylor looked at me, silent and wide-eyed. I knew they didn't get it. They probably didn't even understand why I was doing this. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Jennifer opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She just looked at me, and then at her kids. Finally, she turned to my dad. "James," she said softly, "we have nowhere to go. That's not my problem, I snapped. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. You made your choices, Jennifer. You and Dad both did. And now you're going to deal with the consequences. My dad didn't move. I could see the conflict in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. Maybe he was afraid of losing Jennifer. Maybe he still wanted to pretend like everything was fine. But I didn't care about his excuses anymore. I didn't care about any of them. I don't want to see you here again, I said, pointing toward the door. This is my home now. And you don't get to come in here and tear everything apart just because things aren't working out for you. They didn't argue any further. Jennifer looked like she was going to break, but she kept it together long enough to gather her things. Mason and Taylor trailed behind her, their faces still full of confusion. When they left, I locked the door behind them and leaned against it for a moment, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. I had just kicked my family out of my house. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. The door clicked shut behind them, and I just stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle in. It was like the weight of the last few years, of all the hurt and betrayal, had finally lifted from my shoulders. I could hear the faint sound of Jennifer's voice and the shuffle of footsteps fading away, but I didn't feel any relief. There was no big sense of triumph. Just emptiness. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. I wandered back into the small basement space, feeling the cold air brush against my skin. The mattress on the floor, the cracked walls, the barely functional appliances, they were all still there, but somehow they didn't seem as suffocating anymore. Maybe it was because I had finally taken a stand, even if it had been hard as hell. I could have stayed angry. I could have spent days ruminating on how messed up everything had been, on how much I still resented them. But I knew if I kept doing that, I'd never move forward. So I started to rebuild piece by piece. I spent the next few weeks working nonstop, picking up extra shifts at the diner, fixing whatever I could around the house, and scraping together enough to pay rent. The phone never rang. Not from my dad. Not from Jennifer. And honestly, I was okay with that. I didn't need their calls. I didn't need their approval. But a part of me still hoped for something, some kind of acknowledgement from my dad. Hey, I messed up, from Jennifer. It never came. And that was the final confirmation I needed. They were never going to change. They were always going to put their own needs ahead of mine. In a way, I had already known that. I just needed to see it for myself. I didn't know what happened to them after that. They disappeared, went off to try and figure out their own lives. I didn't ask. They didn't reach out. And I didn't want them to. I had my own life to worry about now. By the time the dust settled, I had a job that actually paid decently and enough savings to put together a small place of my own. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had built something from the ground up without their help, without their interference. Looking back, I realized it wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about freedom. It was about breaking free from all the lies, the manipulations, and the control that had been suffocating me for so long. I was no longer the kid who had been tossed aside. I wasn't some afterthought in their perfect little family. I had my own future now, and it was mine to shape. I still thought about my dad sometimes. I wondered if he ever regretted it. I wondered if Jennifer ever realized how much damage she'd done. But the truth was, it didn't matter. They were no longer part of my story. If there's anything I've learned from all this, it's that you can't wait for people to change. You can't hold on to the hope that someone will eventually see the light. The only person who can change your life is you. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't just surviving, it's finding the strength to move on, even when the people who should have had your back are the ones who let you down the most. To anyone reading this, especially if you're in a similar situation, I want you to know something: you are stronger than you think. It doesn't matter how old you are, or how hopeless things seem. Life will throw you curveballs, and people will fail you, but you don't have to let it define you. Keep pushing forward, keep building your own future, and don't let anyone tell you what you can't do. You can make it, even when it feels impossible. Trust me, I did.